"Get away from that desk right now!" Patricia Whitmore's voice shrieked across the gleaming corporate lobby as 12-year-old Zara Williams scrambled backward, her small hands clutching desperately at the scattered contents of her backpack that had been dumped across the cold marble floor. The white receptionist stood towering over the child like a predator, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusingly, while security guard Thompson moved in closer, his radio crackling ominously in the suddenly silent space. Zara's phone buzzed frantically in her jacket pocket for the 9th time in 15 minutes. The caller ID flashing. "Mommy, urgent board meeting." But the 12-year-old's hands were shaking too violently to answer, while Patricia's ice-cold eyes tracked her every movement like she was hunting prey. The Executive Leadership Conference was starting in exactly 38 minutes on the 45th floor, and little Zara still hadn't delivered the surprise Mother's Day gift that had taken her 4 months of allowance money and chore earnings to save for. The growing crowd of suited professionals and visitors whispered and pointed as Patricia's voice escalated even louder, announcing to the entire lobby that these ghetto children think they can just run wild in here like it's some kind of playground. But what none of them knew was that in exactly 29 minutes, Patricia Whitmore would be escorted out of the building in disgrace, her career destroyed forever by a 12-year-old girl whose mother was about to unleash the full force of corporate America's most powerful woman. First, though, the humiliation was about to reach depths that would traumatize this innocent child for years to come. Before we dive into this incredible story of a mother's fierce protection, if you've ever seen a child treated unfairly because of their race, you need to hear what happens next. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what unfolds in the next hour will show you exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong family. Type protection in the comments if you believe every child deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their skin color. Trust me, you're about to witness the most satisfying mother's revenge story ever told, and you will definitely get a heartwarming reply from us when you show your support for standing up for our children. 12-year-old Zara Williams had been planning this Mother's Day surprise since Christmas. Ever since her mother had wistfully mentioned missing the crystal paperweight her own grandmother had given her, the one destroyed in their apartment fire 3 years ago when they were still struggling to make ends meet. While other 6th graders spent their allowance on toys and candy, Zara had been saving every dollar from her weekly chores, birthday money, and even skipping lunch treats to afford the perfect replica she'd found at an antique shop. Zara was mature beyond her 12 years, having grown up watching her mother work 18-hour days to build her empire from nothing. She'd learned to navigate adult conversations with the poise of someone raised in boardrooms, though she tried to hide this sophistication around other kids who wouldn't understand her unusual upbringing. When Zara had tried to explain to Patricia that she was here to surprise her mother, she'd instinctively reached for her phone to call upstairs, but quickly stopped when she realized the contact name, Mommy, CEO Private Line, would give everything away. "I'll call you back after I give you the surprise, I promise," she'd whispered earlier, declining another call from Mom, executive floor. The expensive Tiffany bracelet, last year's birthday gift that she'd tried to hide under her jacket sleeve, kept sliding down her small wrist, along with a black American Express card that bore the name Z. Williams, authorized user. But at 12 years old, Zara looked like any other middle school student, especially when adults saw only her brown skin and not the subtle signs of privilege. What Patricia couldn't see were the telltale signs that Zara had grown up in a world of corporate power. The way she unconsciously straightened her posture when addressing adults with practiced respect, her intimate knowledge of business etiquette learned from countless bring-your-daughter-to-work days, or how she could discuss quarterly reports and market trends with the fluency of someone who'd been absorbing executive conversations since she could talk. The phone calls kept coming. Dr. Victoria Williams, CEO, Executive Assistant James Park, and board meeting, 15 minutes, flashed across her screen, but she couldn't answer them. Not here. Not when doing so would ruin the surprise that had taken her months of careful planning and sacrifice. Patricia Whitmore had been the gatekeeper of Pinnacle Industries for 26 years, and she'd developed what she smugly called her street sense for spotting troublemakers who didn't belong in her pristine corporate environment. At 57, she took perverse pride in being the first line of defense against what she viewed as undesirable elements infiltrating her professional sanctuary. Patricia had watched the company transform from a small consulting firm to a Fortune 500 powerhouse. But despite repeatedly applying for advancement, she'd never risen beyond her receptionist role. Each rejection had crystallized her resentment into a bitter hatred toward anyone who seemed to get opportunities she felt belonged to her. She'd convinced herself that her stalled career was due to diversity quotas and political correctness, rather than her increasingly obvious prejudices. She'd perfected a sophisticated system of discrimination that was difficult to prove, but devastatingly effective. Well-dressed white visitors were welcomed with warm smiles and offered premium coffee in the executive waiting area. People of color, especially young ones, were immediately viewed with suspicion, subjected to excessive questioning, and made to wait in the uncomfortable chairs near the security checkpoint. Patricia had a particular hatred for children in the building, viewing them as disruptive elements that didn't belong in a professional environment. When those children were black, her hostility intensified into something approaching cruelty. She'd convinced herself that being tough on these children was preparing them for the real world and protecting the company from potential problems. Her discrimination had been enabled by years of management looking the other way. Previous complaints had been dismissed as misunderstandings because Patricia was skilled at maintaining plausible deniability and had cultivated relationships with mid-level managers who saw her as a loyal, long-term employee who maintained professional standards. "Little girl, this is a business office, not a daycare center," Patricia had announced loudly when Zara first approached her desk, deliberately speaking loud enough for the lunch crowd to hear. When Zara politely explained she was here to see her mother, Patricia's expression shifted to theatrical disbelief. "Your mother works here?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension as she looked down at the 12-year-old. "Sweetie, I think you're confused. What's your mommy's name?" Zara hesitated, not wanting to reveal her mother's identity and spoil the surprise. "Mrs. Williams. She's expecting me for a special delivery." Patricia's fingers flew across her keyboard with exaggerated efficiency. "I don't see any appointments for children today, honey. Are you sure your mommy actually told you to come here? Sometimes little girls misunderstand grown-up conversations." When Zara showed her student ID to prove her last name, Patricia examined it like a forensics expert, turning it over multiple times and holding it up to the light. "Well, this looks real enough," she finally admitted grudgingly. "But that doesn't mean you belong here. Anyone can have the same last name as someone important." As the lunch hour brought more professionals and visitors into the lobby, Patricia's voice grew louder and more theatrical. "Security," she called out dramatically, though Zara had done nothing but stand patiently with her small gift bag. "We have a situation with an unaccompanied minor. Security guard Thompson, a middle-aged man who clearly felt uncomfortable dealing with children, approached reluctantly." Patricia began explaining the situation in a voice that carried across the entire marble expanse. "This child claims her mother works here, but she can't provide proper identification or appointment verification. She's being very evasive about her real purpose here." Zara tried again to explain, offering to call her mother's office directly, but Patricia cut her off sharply. "Oh, honey, I'm sure you have someone's number in that phone. Children lie all the time to get attention." She turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "You have to be so careful these days. Kids will make up any story to get into places they don't belong." Several executives stopped their conversations to stare, some already pulling out phones to record what was becoming an increasingly dramatic confrontation between an adult and a child. "I think we need to search her bag," Patricia announced with false authority, as if she were Border Patrol. "She could be carrying anything dangerous. Thompson, check that backpack immediately." Zara clutched her small gift bag protectively. It contained the crystal paperweight in its velvet presentation box, along with the handmade Mother's Day card she'd spent weeks perfecting. "Please, miss, I just need to give my mom her Mother's Day present. It's a surprise." "Mother's Day present?" Patricia laughed harshly, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "How convenient. That's what they all say." She turned to Thompson. "I insist you search that bag thoroughly. We have protocols to protect this company from potential threats." Against his obvious discomfort with manhandling a 12-year-old's belongings, security guard Thompson began examining Zara's precious items. The carefully wrapped gift box, the delicate crystal paperweight, and the lovingly crafted card were handled roughly as Patricia watched with satisfaction. "This paperweight probably costs more than most people make in a week," Patricia commented loudly, examining the antique crystal piece. "Very interesting that a little girl from the projects just happens to have something so expensive for her mother, who supposedly works here." The implication was crystal clear to everyone watching. She was accusing a 12-year-old child of theft. Patricia had now attracted a crowd of nearly 40 people in the lobby, including several executives heading to lunch and visitors waiting for their own appointments. She seemed to feed off the attention, her voice growing more authoritative and cruel as she humiliated the child. "I'm confiscating this phone," she announced, snatching the device from Zara's small hands. "Children shouldn't have phones this expensive anyway. We need to investigate how she got it." Zara's eyes filled with tears of panic. "Please, you can't take my phone. My mommy is trying to call me about..." "About what? Your next little scheme?" Patricia's voice reached a crescendo as she towered over the trembling child. "Thompson, I want this child isolated in the corner until we can contact social services. She's clearly unsupervised and possibly abandoned." Zara was moved to a corner of the lobby like a criminal, surrounded by security, while Patricia's growing audience watched the spectacle. Other visitors gave her wide berth, some shaking their heads in disgust at what they assumed was a case of child abandonment or delinquency. The phone buzzed constantly in Patricia's possession, but she ignored it with malicious satisfaction. "Probably some gang member trying to coordinate with her," she muttered loud enough for others to hear. With the executive leadership meeting starting in just 15 minutes, 12-year-old Zara felt her carefully planned Mother's Day surprise slipping away forever. Tears of frustration, fear, and deep humiliation poured down her cheeks as Patricia reached the peak of her cruelty. "Look at her crying now," Patricia announced to the captivated crowd, her voice filled with mock concern. "These children always turn on the waterworks when they get caught. It's always the same story. I'm here to see my mommy. I have a present. It's all innocent." She leaned down to Zara's eye level, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper that still carried across the silent lobby. "Let me tell you something, little girl. I've been protecting this building longer than you've been alive. I know exactly what kind of people you come from, and children like you don't belong in a place like this. Your kind never does." The lobby fell into horrified silence. Even Patricia's supporters looked uncomfortable with the blatantly racist language directed at a 12-year-old child. Zara looked up through her tears, her small voice barely audible. "Please, ma'am, just let me give my mommy her Mother's Day gift. That's all I want to do. I saved for 4 whole months." Patricia's response would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. "Your mother? Working in this building? Honey, the only way your mother has access to this place is if she's part of the cleaning crew that comes in after hours. And even then, she shouldn't be bringing her children to work. Now stop this pathetic performance and tell me who really sent you here to case the joint. 4 floors above the unfolding nightmare, the quarterly executive leadership meeting of Pinnacle Industries was about to begin. The boardroom hummed with conversations as 15 of the most influential business leaders on the East Coast took their seats around the custom Italian conference table. Merger discussions, expansion strategies, and market projections filled the air, but the CEO's chair remained conspicuously empty. Dr. Victoria Amelia Williams stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, gazing out at the city skyline, while her phone rang incessantly. At 42, she commanded respect in corporate boardrooms around the world. Her journey from a single mother working 3 jobs to put herself through Harvard Business School, to becoming the youngest black woman CEO of a Fortune 500 company, had been featured on the covers of Time, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review. But right now, all she wanted was to hear her daughter's voice. "James," she called to her executive assistant, "have you reached Zara yet? She should have arrived 30 minutes ago." James Park, who had been with the company for 6 years and had watched Zara grow from a shy 8-year-old to a poised 12-year-old, shook his head with growing concern. "Her phone is going straight to voicemail, Dr. Williams. That's completely unlike her. She was so excited about surprising you today. She could barely sleep last night." Victoria's frown deepened with maternal worry. Zara was never unreachable, especially not today. The girl had been mysteriously secretive for months, clearly planning something special for Mother's Day. Victoria had played along, pretending not to notice the hushed phone calls to antique shops, and the way Zara had been doing extra chores without being asked. "Try the front desk," Victoria instructed, her CEO instincts beginning to trigger alongside her maternal ones. Maybe she's having trouble with building security. James's call to the main reception desk went unanswered. Patricia was too engrossed in her situation to bother with phone calls. After the 4th attempt, James contacted the building security office directly. "Building security? This is James Park, calling from the CEO's office. We're looking for a 12-year-old girl named Zara Williams, who should have arrived 45 minutes ago." What do you mean? There's an incident involving a minor in the lobby." Victoria's head snapped toward James as his expression changed from confusion to alarm to barely controlled rage. "What kind of incident?" James demanded, his voice tight with professional control masking personal fury. "Where is she exactly? And is she safe?" The conversation that followed would set in motion events that would reshape the company's entire culture and destroy multiple careers. "Dr. Williams," James said, his voice trembling with controlled anger, "you need to see this immediately. And ma'am, you're going to want to call the lawyers. You're about to witness what happens when someone messes with the wrong mother's child. If you think Patricia is about to face the full wrath of one of America's most powerful CEOs, type Mama Bear in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because the next 10 minutes will show you exactly why you never, ever target someone's baby. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if this was your 12-year-old daughter being humiliated like this? In the lobby, 12-year-old Zara sat huddled in a chair, surrounded by security and an increasingly hostile crowd, looking impossibly small and vulnerable. Patricia basked in her moment of absolute authority, receiving nods of approval from supporters who praised her for maintaining order and keeping these elements in check. "I've contacted Child Protective Services," Patricia announced proudly to her audience. "They should be here within 20 minutes to deal with this case of child abandonment and possible theft. We'll get to the bottom of whatever scam this is." Zara stared at the floor, her Mother's Day surprise ruined, her dignity destroyed, and her faith in adult kindness shattered completely. The beautiful crystal paperweight sat on Patricia's desk like evidence in a criminal case, while her handmade card was crumpled from rough handling. Other employees and visitors whispered among themselves, "Can you believe a child that young would try something so elaborate? Thank goodness for Patricia. Who knows what she was really planning?" These kids are getting bolder every day, but a few voices began to express growing discomfort. "She's just a baby. This seems excessive. That paperweight is definitely authentic baccarat crystal. Very expensive. Something doesn't feel right about this whole situation." Outside the building, a convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows began pulling up to the executive entrance. Men and women in expensive suits emerged, speaking urgently into phones and striding purposefully toward the private executive elevators. But the crowd was too focused on Patricia's performance to notice the gathering storm. The building's head of security, Michael Rodriguez, received an emergency call that made his blood freeze in his veins. Within seconds, he was racing toward the main lobby, his heart pounding with the terrible realization that a career-ending catastrophe was unfolding under his watch. What happened next would become legendary in corporate America and change child protection policies nationwide. The lobby's polished marble floors suddenly echoed with the sharp, authoritative click of designer heels, moving with the precision and purpose of someone who owned everything she walked on. Conversations died mid-sentence as employees and visitors instinctively turned toward the unmistakable sound of real power approaching. Patricia looked up from her moment of triumph, slightly irritated by the interruption to her public demonstration of authority. Security guard Thompson straightened his posture immediately, recognizing the distinctive bearing of someone whose mere presence could end careers with a single word. The elevator doors opened to reveal a group of impeccably dressed executives, but the figure leading them commanded attention like a force of nature. Even before anyone could clearly see her face, the energy in the room shifted dramatically. This was executive power in its purest form, confident, controlled, and absolutely terrifying when crossed. Senior Vice President Martinez gasped audibly from across the lobby, his coffee cup slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter against the marble floor. "Dear God," he whispered. But in the sudden, complete silence, his words carried like thunder. Jennifer Chen from Legal Services went completely pale, her hand flying to cover her mouth in horror as she recognized the approaching figure. Executive Director Williams, no relation to the child, suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear into the earth itself. "Is that?" someone whispered from the growing crowd. "It can't be." Another voice trembled with dawning realization. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," came a barely audible mutter from someone who clearly understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Patricia squinted across the lobby, still not grasping the seismic shift occurring around her. She was accustomed to being the center of attention, the person in control of every situation, and she didn't appreciate having her spotlight stolen by some corporate executive having a bad day. Security guard Thompson, however, had spent enough years working corporate security to recognize the walk, the bearing, and the unmistakable presence of Dr. Victoria Amelia Williams, CEO of Pinnacle Industries, before he could even see her face clearly. His hand moved instinctively toward his radio, but he froze, realizing that calling for backup when the most powerful person in the building was approaching might not be the wisest career move. 12-year-old Zara looked up through her tears, and her entire expression transformed in an instant. The broken, terrified child disappeared, replaced by a little girl whose eyes blazed with the absolute certainty that her mother, her powerful, protective, fierce mother, was about to make everything right. Dr. Victoria Amelia Williams stopped in the exact center of the lobby, her commanding presence creating a circle of absolute silence that seemed to radiate outward like shockwaves from an earthquake's epicenter. At 5 feet 9 inches tall, with the regal bearing of someone who had fought her way to the top of corporate America while raising a daughter alone, she surveyed the scene with the cold calculation of a general preparing for total war. Her eyes found Zara first, taking in her daughter's tear-stained face, the way she was isolated like a criminal, and the precious Mother's Day gifts displayed on Patricia's desk like evidence of wrongdoing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees as Victoria's expression hardened into something that made seasoned executives physically step backward. Then her gaze moved to Patricia, who still stood behind her desk with Zara's confiscated phone in her hand and the crystal paperweight positioned like stolen goods. "I am Dr. Victoria Amelia Williams." Her voice cut through the marble expanse with the authority of someone who routinely commanded boardrooms full of the most powerful people in America. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Industries, and Zara Williams is my daughter." The silence that followed was so profound that the only sounds were the distant hum of elevator machinery and the barely perceptible whisper of the building's climate control system. Patricia's face went through a series of expressions like frames in a horror movie: confusion, dawning realization, disbelief, and finally, the ashen horror of someone watching their entire existence crumble in real time. "James," Victoria said with deadly calm, never taking her eyes off Patricia, "please show me the security footage from the past hour. All cameras, all angles." James Park materialized beside her as if from thin air, tablet in hand, accompanied by Michael Rodriguez, the head of building security, whose face was grim with professional mortification at what had occurred on his watch. "Ma'am," Michael Rodriguez began, his voice tight with barely controlled anger at his own staff. "I've personally reviewed the footage from 6 different cameras. We have clear audio and video documentation of everything that transpired here today." The tablet screen was angled toward the crowd, and Patricia's voice filled the lobby from the security recording. "These ghetto children think they can just run wild in here like it's some kind of playground." More damning evidence emerged from witnesses in the crowd. Jennifer Chen from legal stepped forward, her voice shaking with rage. "Dr. Williams, I witnessed the entire incident. Your daughter was nothing but polite and respectful throughout this absolute nightmare. The language used was completely unacceptable for addressing any child, let alone," she gestured helplessly at 12-year-old Zara. Senior Vice President Martinez joined her. "I have video on my phone, Dr. Williams. The accusations were not only baseless, but clearly motivated by racial prejudice. What I witnessed was systematic harassment of a 12-year-old child." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist who had been visiting for a consultation, spoke up with professional authority. "I've spent 20 years working with children who've experienced trauma. What I observed here constitutes emotional abuse and racial harassment. That little girl showed extraordinary courage under circumstances that would break most adults." Victoria walked slowly toward Patricia's desk, each step measured and deliberate, like a predator closing in on cornered prey. The crowd parted before her as she moved, and Patricia seemed to physically shrink with each approaching footfall. "Ms. Whitmore," Victoria's voice was quiet now, but somehow more terrifying than if she had been screaming. "Please explain to me why my 12-year-old daughter, who was bringing me a Mother's Day gift that she saved 4 months to buy, was treated like a criminal in the lobby of my own company." Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish drowning in air. "I didn't know." She wouldn't say. "The security protocols." "The security protocols," Victoria repeated slowly, her voice dripping with controlled fury. "That apparently don't apply to white children who visit this building regularly without being questioned, searched, or publicly humiliated. Victoria picked up Zara's phone from Patricia's desk, noting the dozens of missed calls, including several from her own private line. You confiscated a 12-year-old child's phone, preventing her from contacting her mother to resolve this situation. You called Child Protective Services to report her as abandoned? Why? I thought I was protecting the company. Children lie about these things. Children lie, Victoria nodded thoughtfully, her voice becoming even more dangerously quiet. And in your 26 years of employment here, Ms. Whitmore, how many white 12-year-olds have you accused of lying about visiting their parents? How many have you had searched, isolated, and reported to social services? The silence stretched on as Patricia realized that every possible excuse had already been shredded by the evidence and witness testimony. Michael Rodriguez stepped forward with additional information that would seal Patricia's fate forever. Dr. Williams, I've uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior going back over a decade. We have documented complaints about Ms. Whitmore's treatment of minority visitors, particularly children, that were previously dismissed or buried. The pattern is clear, consistent, and absolutely inexcusable. Victoria turned to address the entire crowd that had gathered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of lives and millions of dollars. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice echoing off the marble walls. What you have witnessed here today represents everything that Pinnacle Industries stands against. This behavior is not only morally reprehensible, but constitutes a complete betrayal of our core values and legal obligations. Her eyes swept across the faces in the crowd, some ashamed, some vindicated, all riveted by the unfolding justice. Ms. Patricia Whitmore, Victoria announced with formal authority, you are terminated from your position effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and your access to this building and all company properties is permanently revoked. Patricia began to speak, but Victoria held up a hand for absolute silence. Furthermore, our legal department will be conducting a comprehensive investigation into your documented pattern of discriminatory behavior. Any employees, visitors, or community members who have experienced similar treatment are strongly encouraged to come forward. Michael Rodriguez stepped forward with Patricia's security credentials, removing them with the efficiency of someone who had clearly been waiting years for this moment. The authorities are on their way, Victoria continued, not to investigate my daughter as you requested, but to document the harassment and discrimination that occurred here today. The district attorney's office will determine what criminal charges, if any, are appropriate for the emotional abuse of a minor. As if summoned by her words, sirens could be heard approaching the building, but now everyone understood exactly who they were coming to protect. I want every employee of this company to understand something with absolute clarity. Victoria's voice rose to address the growing crowd. Pinnacle Industries was built on principles of excellence, innovation, and respect for all people, regardless of race, age, or background. What happened to my daughter here today represents everything we have fought against in building this company, and it will never, ever happen again. Victoria's response to the assault on her daughter would become a case study in corporate leadership, child advocacy, and social justice. Within hours, sweeping changes were announced. Immediate policy overhaul. All customer-facing personnel would undergo mandatory unconscious bias and child sensitivity training within 2 weeks. A zero-tolerance policy for discrimination was implemented with automatic termination for any violations. Multiple reporting channels were established, including anonymous options and direct lines to executive leadership. Monthly sensitivity audits would be conducted by independent civil rights organizations. Structural revolution. A new chief diversity officer position was created at the executive level, reporting directly to the CEO. Weekly sensitivity training became mandatory for all employees, with special focus on interactions with minors. Child-friendly protocols were established to ensure young visitors felt safe and welcome. Video monitoring of all public interactions was expanded with mandatory weekly review processes. Community investment. A $10 million fund was established to support anti-racism education in schools nationwide. Annual scholarships were created specifically for children who had experienced discrimination. Partnerships were formed with child advocacy organizations to ensure ongoing accountability. Regular community forums were scheduled to maintain open dialogue about racism and child protection. Legal accountability. An independent civil rights firm was retained to investigate all historical complaints of discrimination. Previous victims were contacted and offered comprehensive support, including therapy and legal assistance. Company policies were completely rewritten by civil rights attorneys to exceed federal compliance requirements. Quarterly reporting to oversight organizations was implemented to maintain absolute transparency. 3 hours after the nightmare began, Zara finally achieved her original goal, though in a way she never could have imagined. The executive leadership meeting was postponed so that Victoria could spend time with her daughter, and the crystal paperweight was presented in the CEO's office, surrounded by senior executives who wanted to personally apologize to both mother and daughter. "Mommy," Zara said quietly as they sat together in the corner office overlooking the city. "I just wanted to surprise you for Mother's Day. I saved my allowance for 4 whole months to buy that paperweight." Victoria held the crystal piece carefully, reading the engraving Zara had added. "To Mommy, you taught me to be strong and brave like you. I love you more than all the stars. Happy Mother's Day. Love, Zara." "Baby girl," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion, as she held her daughter close. "You showed more strength and dignity in that lobby today than most adults show in their entire lives. I'm so proud of how you handled yourself, even when faced with something so ugly and wrong." The Mother's Day celebration that evening included not just family, but several employees who had witnessed the incident and wanted to personally apologize to Zara and show their support. Jennifer Chen brought her own daughter to meet Zara, telling her, "This is what real courage looks like, when someone tries to make you feel small because of who you are." Zara had transformed her traumatic experience into a powerful platform for change. Despite her young age, she began speaking at diversity conferences and corporate events about the impact of discrimination on children. Her poise and articulation impressed business leaders across the nation, leading to mentorship opportunities and early acceptance into prestigious summer programs. The crystal paperweight became Victoria's most treasured possession, displayed prominently on her desk, not because of its beauty, but because of the love, sacrifice, and courage it represented. She used it as a reminder during every meeting about the importance of protecting the vulnerable and standing up for what's right. 2 years later, Pinnacle Industries had become the gold standard for corporate inclusion and child advocacy, winning numerous awards for its innovative approaches to workplace equity and community engagement. The company's unwavering commitment to justice had actually strengthened its business performance, attracting top talent from diverse backgrounds and earning unwavering loyalty from customers who valued ethical leadership. 14-year-old Zara had developed into a confident, articulate young advocate for children's rights. She established a nonprofit organization called Little Voices, Big Changes, focused on helping young people document and address discrimination, providing them with legal resources, counseling support, and platforms to share their stories. Patricia Whitmore's termination had become a watershed moment in employment law. Unable to find work due to her documented history of discrimination against children and minorities, she faced criminal charges for child endangerment and civil lawsuits from previous victims who came forward. Her case became a cautionary tale, taught in business schools and HR certification programs nationwide. Security guard Thompson, who had participated in Zara's humiliation, was also terminated and replaced with personnel specially trained in child protection and conflict de-escalation. The new security team became known throughout the business district for their professionalism and special care in welcoming young visitors. 17-year-old Zara had been accepted to Harvard Business School through their early admission program, following in her mother's footsteps while carving out her own legacy as a children's rights advocate. Her nonprofit had grown into a national organization that had helped hundreds of young people find their voices and seek justice for discrimination. The crystal paperweight still sat prominently on Victoria's desk, but it had been joined by hundreds of letters from children around the country who had been inspired by Zara's story to stand up against bullying and discrimination in their own lives. Each letter represented a victory against prejudice and a step toward a more just society. Victoria often reflected on that terrible day in the lobby, recognizing it as a transformative moment not just for her company, but for her understanding of the challenges her daughter would face as a young black girl in America. The incident had converted a successful business into a force for social justice, proving that sometimes the most painful experiences can become catalysts for the most meaningful change. Today, the Pinnacle Industries lobby features a child-friendly welcome center and a prominent plaque dedicated to dignity, respect, and protection for all children. It serves as a daily reminder to every employee and visitor that character is not determined by age or appearance, and that protecting children from discrimination requires constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. Zara's story became more than just an account of a mother's fierce protection. It became a blueprint for how individuals, families, and organizations can transform moments of crisis into opportunities for lasting social change. The 12-year-old girl who was humiliated in that lobby had grown into a leader who used her experience to ensure that no other child would have to endure what she had faced. And every Mother's Day, Victoria and Zara would have lunch together in that same lobby, now a welcoming space designed with children in mind, using the crystal paperweight as a centerpiece for their celebration, remembering not the pain of that day, but the strength they had found together in standing up for justice and protecting the innocent. The story serves as a powerful reminder that real change often begins with protecting our most vulnerable citizens. Supported by leaders willing to take decisive action when confronted with injustice, it demonstrates that while discrimination against children remains a painful reality,